Hi students, welcome to this lecture focusing on the Hebrew Bible. After an account of the immigration of the Hebrews into Canaan, their own story is told in the Tanakh, the Old Testament for Christians, and ways in which they were influenced by surrounding cultures. We deal with the unique elements in Hebrew literature, monotheism and the Jews' covenant with their God, Yahweh. And we treat the ways in which the Tanakh is neither pure literature, nor history, nor theology, but a blending of all three, which foregrounds the relationship between God and his people. We go on here to show the ways, sometimes paradoxical, this blending expresses itself in narrative, and we illustrate that paradox with a reading of passages from the First of Samuel, containing two versions of part of the David story, in which human and divine agency are set side by side in ways that explain the Hebrew experience within history, but which remain mysterious and defy reconciliation with each other. This is a map that depicts important events from the Hebrew Bible, including a trail showing the Hebrews' exodus from Egypt, Abraham's wanderings, and Jacob's journey to Canaan, where God gives the land of Canaan to the descendants of Jacob. In terms of key passages, if you'll recall from the lecture PowerPoint video on the Epic of Gilgamesh, these are sort of anchoring passages, anchoring direct quotations from the assigned reading that I want you to keep in mind as you're reading. I also want you to write them down in your notes and be able to summarize them and develop your own analysis of them. The first being from Genesis book of 3. And the second from Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Obviously, these are sacred writings from the Hebrew Bible in terms of form. We have a multitude of thematics here to consider, certainly faith and loyalty, creation, Genesis, suffering, free will, sacrifice, human nature, certainly gender when we think about book 3 from Genesis. The first book of the Bible takes its name from the Greek word for origins and accounts for the world's creation and lives of the first humans. Human beings are central in this account of the world's origin, which differs from, say, Mesopotamian, Greek, or other early cosmogonies. Say, for example, the Greek pantheon is more focused on, say, the birth and the life of the gods, right? Similar with Mesopotamian creation stories. Genesis here in the Hebrew Bible also accounts for covenants or promises, vows made between Noah and God after the flood. Of course, we saw that great flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh as well. Covenants here between Abraham and God to establish the nation of Israel, and between God and Jacob to receive blessings for the generations that follow. I kind of want to say a little bit more about Genesis here. Genesis chapter 37, verses 39 to 45. This is Joseph's ability to interpret the Pharaoh's dream, right? And it really sort of illustrates this cultural consideration, this potential insight and understanding that one from outside a particular culture can have. So pay attention to that Pharaoh's dream and Joseph's interpretation of it from Genesis chapter 37. Joseph, obviously, who dreams himself, is enabled by God to properly interpret the dreams of not just the Pharaoh, but of the chief baker, of the chief cupbearer. He's blessed with this ability such that even while he was a slave, quote, his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made succeed in his hand, and Joseph found favor in his eyes and ministered to him and put him in charge of his house. That's from the full text edition. Joseph also understands Egyptian culture with a real insight. And he's able to properly direct the preparations for the coming famine. It's precisely that reunites him with his brothers and his father. So conversely, the inability of the Egyptians to understand their dreams implies this sort of basic human difficulty in self-understanding and the difficulty in fairly evaluating one's own culture, right? Obviously, in the Hebrew Bible, we have the creation story. You may be thinking about human behavior and natural environments before and after the fall. So, ask yourself what changed after humans ate the fruit. Do some deep analysis around this phrase, knowledge of good and evil, as it relates to desire, for example. There's certain, if you do a close reading of the creation story of Adam and Eve, there not only are there two creation stories, but there are certain things that took place in Eden prior to the fall, including procreation. Sex itself wasn't considered a sin, but prior to knowledge of good and evil, sex existed solely to, quote, be fruitful and multiply. So with the advent of desire arose the notion of sex for pleasure and the fulfillment of desire, right? So be aware of these concepts of desire and the relationship to that phrase, knowledge of good and evil. And an opportunity for deeper analysis, go ahead and pause this lecture video, take a look at this writing prompt. What is the difference between the curse given to the first man and the curse given to the first woman? Why are they different curses? Is that significant? Do the punishments correspond to the distinct manners in which the man and the woman fell into sin? So take this writing prompt, pause this lecture video, do some deeper analysis in your notes here. Biblical flood, we've already seen a parallel in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. And this is really a great opportunity for you to compare Greek, Sumerian myths. Why did floods wipe out humanity in these civilizations? Was it God's wrath? Was it natural causes? How were humans repopulated? So we have an opportunity here for a comparative analysis in your notes. Again, pause this lecture video, compare the Hebrew Bible's account of the flood to the Upanishad's flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. What are the differences? What are the similarities? How can we interpret them? How is the Great Flood perhaps symbolic of some deeper aspect of human nature? So maybe don't take it as literally, right? Also think about it symbolically, metaphorically, as an allegory, perhaps. Mesopotamians built ziggurats. Ziggurats as these sort of terraced pyramids. they were pyramid shaped, but they had these sort of daises on them that kind of graduated up. So ziggurats were these terraced pyramid complexes meant to house gods, and at the shrine allow priests to serve and sort of placate the gods. Here, opportunity for deeper analysis, the Tower of Babel. You can comparatively analyze that alongside the Cain and Abel narrative, thinking about sin, how God deals with sin differently in these two instances. Inferences that can be made concerning God, inferences that can be made concerning human nature. Another key story in the Hebrew Bible, Abraham and Isaac. Obviously, a central thematic here, that of fatherhood, faith in one's father, faith in God, which is represented, not only in the relationship between Abraham and Isaac, but also between Abraham and God. In pagan religions, child sacrifice to one's God was not uncommon. So the expectation for Abraham to sacrifice his son to God is really, it shouldn't be that amazing to modern readers. God provides a ram exactly as Abraham told Isaac that he would, but not before Abraham demonstrates his willingness to be completely obedient. And this identification of God as one who does not demand human sacrifice and who values human life is significantly different than many other ancient religious traditions. And I think an important facet of the uniqueness of the Hebrew tradition. Of course, we have this monumental example of Abraham's faith, Abraham's obedience, and as a result, he received this profound blessing from God that passes on to Abraham's descendants, generation through generation through generation. Exodus. From Exodus, we get the Ten Commandments, the law. And of course, you will note from the Hebrew Bible and the Ten Commandments, both positive and negative commandments, right? So very prescriptive. You shall XYZ. You shall not XYZ. And if you look at the footnote here to the excerpts from Exodus, that's hard to say, the excerpts from Exodus in the Hebrew Bible in your Norton, you'll see that footnote 9 indicates that you here specifically addresses each individual person rather than the group, you all. So think about what each commandment stands for. Think about the consequence of observing these commandments. Does that inevitably lead to a more just society, a more peaceful existence for all peoples? Moses, according to Jewish biblical scholarship, Moses spoke with a stutter. He was adopted by the Egyptian pharaoh after his Hebrew mother sent him down the Nile in a basket. And of course, at this time, Jewish male children were being murdered because a prophecy had been foretold that a Jewish male would be the ruin of Egypt. So you have that sort of background story affecting your ability to understand certain actions and certain demands that are made by Moses. Psalms. I've included a link. There's a little section of the module with external digital resources. And there's a digital resource provided there for Gregorian chants, right? So I encourage you to press play as an external resource, especially when we're thinking about hymns of praise, when we're thinking about musicality. Psalms here from the Hebrew Bible comprised of 150 songs. They were used in worship. And we see this combination, this artful combination of adoration, propitiation, and thanksgiving in psalm prayer. And those aspects inform the motions of prayer throughout Psalms. But there's a different emphasis in each. And this, we'll see some similar resonances between Psalms and the Quran when we get there in a couple of weeks. Psalms 8 and 23 are particularly focused on the encomium. They do not request anything of God, but they simply praise him. They enumerate his works. While all of the prayers in Psalms are addressed to God, some of them have a different purpose. Some serve as educational texts that inform the listener about the nature of God. As a whole, they are not merely prayers of the Hebrew people, but they are apologetic works, they are catechismic works. They are sincere in their trust in God's power. And some of the Psalms can also serve as threats to the enemies of the Hebrews, such as Psalm 137. It warns of the inevitable destruction of Babylon. So, when we think about, Psalms 19, Psalm 104 here, beginning with an invocation for God's blessing, it proceeds to extol the extent of God's power, praising God throughout the beginning, but they conclude with these sort of entreaties, right? Psalm 19 concludes, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer." 104 describes God and the origins of the earth, quote, "who laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever." 137, Psalm 8, 137, again, you can do this comparative analysis between the Psalms in terms of their purpose and their function. So when we look, say, at 137, it's a prayer of entreaty, of contrition. It's expectant of God's coming deliverance. And we can contrast 137 to a much simpler psalm, say Psalm 8, which just asks God to remember the enemies of Israel. "Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom, O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed. Happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us." So there are songs of worship, hymns of praise. Some of these psalms are lamenting. Inevitably, we get imagery, right? Musicality. Again, I want to encourage you to listen to some of those Gregorian chants in the external digital resources. And we have arrived at your questions for reflection. 2 discussion questions from this reading on the Hebrew Bible, both of these on Canvas. So discuss the distinctions between approaching a text as a religious manifestation of the divine revelation and as a literary work of art. How does that change how you read the text? Does it offer different insights? And then number 2, also on Canvas, this is the deeper analysis prompt from a few slides ago. So if you paused then and wrote in your notes, you should already have some analysis here. Of course, you may think about the motives that man and woman had for eating the fruit. You might consider why this story is only present in the second account of the creation. And we will pause there with our second lecture video, this on the Hebrew Bible.